can. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Martin. Slides are coming up now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some work we've been doing in Leicester for a few years now, in the last year we've been using Google+, and I'm going to talk about that. This isn't really a techie talk, although there is a little bit of techie stuff brought to you through the magic of Tony Hurst, who some of you heard speak this morning. So hopefully that will be of interest to you. Just briefly, our background is I'm in the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Leicester, and we have an intake of approximately 270 students a year. That's going up rapidly. And one of the things I teach them is a key skills module, IT and numeracy skills. And so we have this problem of increasing student numbers and how to interact with these students. We deliver all of our content for this module online using Blackboard in our case. I should say we are not, University of Leicester is not a Google Apps institution. We've looked for years at the best model of interacting with these students, and then a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago now, I had this insight whereby I walked into a computer laboratory on campus and every single screen had Facebook on it, had that blue bar across the top of the screen. And it occurred to me that the level of engagement that these students had with Facebook was something that we needed to somehow try and sequester for educational purposes. So we didn't want to use Facebook because there's this thing that Dana Boyd talks about called context collapse. So I was very interested to hear the talk from Cork this morning about students using email and formalizing communications with universities. We didn't want to use Facebook because we saw it as definitely a social channel. So we used a tool called FriendFeed. Some of you may have seen this, others may not. It's an aggregator, but it's also a social network in its own right, and we used it because it had some of the attributes of Facebook, the social network type attributes, but it wasn't Facebook, it was a separate channel. And basically, we asked students to make a defined number of contributions to this site, and we recorded their behavior. And there were various responses to this, but they pretty much liked it. We were very encouraged at the level of engagement that we had, and we published this paper in January of this year or February, and one of the things I think we were able to demonstrate was that student activity on the social network is actually a proxy for academic engagement. You could show statistically the parallels between student activity on FriendFeed and academic outcomes. Now that, okay, so this is our summary of what we learned. Female students score higher marks than male students for the social network activity because they are more social, probably. They certainly make more contributions. But when you look at the overall mark, the overall module mark, we actually see no difference in overall academic outcomes. And our interpretation of that is that although female students are apparently more social and make more online contribution than males, a typical male student is more strategically focused on assessment. And as I said, you can show a correlation, strong correlation between the marks for social network contributions and overall academic output, excluding the social network component. So this is a proxy for student engagement. Now, if I skip to well, actually, before I get to talking about Google+, which is what I'm going to go on to talk about, let me tell you what the problem with this is, this approach. The problem is that these statistics are crude in that they are looking at an entire population of students, an entire cohort of students. And remember, I said that one of my problems is dealing with hundreds of students and an increasing number of students each year. And we know that if we look at all of the inputs that the students make, so entries, subscriptions, so following other students, the number of comments they make, the number of likes, which are equivalent to +1s, all of those things are highly skewed. You have a small number of students who are highly active and a large number of students that are much less active. And so these population statistics don't really tell us very much about individual students. And that was a problem. So we need a more detailed framework for looking at student activity if we're going to give each individual student a more meaningful assessment. So that brings me to Google+. Now, in September of last year, we made the decision that we were going to switch our student network from FriendFeed to Google+. FriendFeed was actually purchased by Facebook in 2009, and since that time it's languished and there's been no development. And there was, although Facebook say they have no plans to shutter FriendFeed, there's always the possibility that it could go away at any point. So even though it was very new and untried, we decided we were going to switch to Google+ because it seemed to have the potential to do what we wanted to do. So this is a quick snapshot, quick visualization of my network on Google+ a year ago. I should go back and do this again, actually. It's just an indication of the people I talk to. Scientists, I have a large science community that I talk to. Most of the people I talk to are educationalists. There's a big Irish cluster of educationalists for some reason I don't completely understand, and there are Leicester students who talk to me on Google+. But that, as I say, this diagram is now out of date. So what we wanted to do was figure out the best way of using this tool. So as I said, we use Blackboard for course delivery, and one of the things that we did was to integrate Blackboard into integrate Google+ into Blackboard by putting a link in the sidebar, the side navigation of Blackboard. And one of the things we experimented with is giving students feedback on assessments via Google+ rather than by Blackboard. And the reason we wanted to do that is because we were able to separate the marks that students get in the Blackboard gradebook from their feedback. So I would start a feedback thread on Google+, and students could access that. Although we do have a navigation link in the sidebar, we put specific links in related to particular assessments that students had done. So this was a group work assessment in Google Docs. And I shared with them some statistics for the assessment, some prompts that they might want to think about. And then we had got this very, very active conversation going on, and I was very encouraged by the amount of engagement that we got here, and this principle of separating the marks from the actual reflective activity of feedback was very successful for us, and I was very pleased about that. And we've written that up and we've published this, and we've talked about the principles behind this and the way we implemented it, and you can get that from this URL. So because the talk is being recorded, you'll be able to grab that after the talk. Now, in terms of framing students' attitudes towards Google+, what we've been doing over the last year is based on the work that Dave White published originally a couple of years ago and formally as a paper last year, and it's this model of visitors and residents. And the model basically says that social network users can be divided along a continuum, and that's very important. This isn't a binary division between one category and another. This is a continuum between visitors who are instrumental. They see a network or a site as a tool, and they will visit possibly only occasionally, and they will be highly specific in what they're expecting when they go to that site. Residents are likely to be online more frequently, and they're also have a different attitude. They're much more open in their expectations, and they're much more willing to engage in conversation rather than simply carry out a task. So what we've done is to build up this framework for looking at student contributions to Google+. We look at three things. We look at the content. We decide what students are actually discussing by the content that they post, and that's actually the easiest one to do. We look at the context, the reasons why they post particular items. Now, that's trickier. You can't actually get the context from the tool itself, so you can't get the context about why they're posting something on Google+ from Google+. You can only extract that as metadata from a questionnaire which asks them about attitudes. And we also did network visualization work to see what that told us. So this is our analysis of content. So this is a biology course, remember, and these are the things that students are talking about. So they're talking about the things we want them to talk about. They're talking about cells, and they're talking about cancer and various other things, but they're talking about presentations and work and essays and various other things. And what they actually do is they engage in these object-centered threaded discussions on Google+, where they use usually a source of information such as maybe a news story from BBC News or an article from New Scientist or another journal, and they use that as a prompt for a thread, and then there will be a discussion on that thread. So that's the content part. The context part is, don't worry about reading all the writing on this slide. I don't intend you to read it all. But we administered a questionnaire to students, and it asked them a number of things. It was our bog standard module feedback questionnaire that asked them what they thought about the module. But tucked away in there were questions about their attitude to Google+. So we had various questions, 4 questions, which helped us map them on this visitor-resident continuum that I've talked about. And we also had a question that looked at their attitude towards Google+ in terms of institutional use versus personal use. Did they regard it as something that they had ownership of, even though, as I say, we're not a Google Apps institution, so they started their own, they signed up for their own Google+ accounts, or did they regard it as a more personal tool? And we took that data and we plotted it. So this is the visitor resident axis, and this is the institutional personal axis based on the questionnaire metadata. And we didn't know what we were going to find when we did this. And the interesting thing here is there is quite a spread of opinion. There's quite a spread of opinion along the horizontal visitor-resident axis. Perhaps not surprisingly, because we're assessing contributions to Google+, the majority of students see this as an institutional tool. There's only a few of them that say they see it as more or less exclusively a personal tool, because we're driving this process with assessment. Now, what we did was we took a number of these students that we thought were representative, and these are the red crosses on this diagram, and then we went on and we actually did the network mapping with those with the help of Tony Hurst. Now, I'm only going to show you a few of the network mapping diagrams because actually we've done quite a lot of network mapping, and most of the students' networks on Google Plus look remarkably similar. Um, they have this very, very dense structure in the center of them, almost all of them. And the reason that that is there is because we use circle sharing to get them in contact with each other. We ask them to sign up to Google Plus, and they follow me, and as they follow me, I add them to a circle, and then I reshare that circle with them, and they reshare that circle with each other. So you wind up with this very dense hairball in the center of the diagram. Around the outside of that are more interesting people. So we've got members of academic staff in this kind of region here, who obviously talk to students but also have their own existing networks and talk to other people. And then occasionally you'll get these outliers where the student has decided to connect with these groups, and some of these groups are just quite interesting. They're occasionally social groups, but they're more often they're degree related accounts that they've connected to, and there are a few celebrities. I think over here we've got Jensen Button, and one of these diagrams has got Snoop Dogg in because that was one of the Google recommended users earlier last year. Now this student is very different, and this student's interesting, and the reason this student is interesting is because they've got a much smaller diagram than the other students, and as you see, the structure is quite different. Now we know who this student is, we can identify this student, and what helps us to interpret this diagram, this network diagram, is the fact that this student is an overseas student. Their first language is not English. And reading through the responses to the questionnaire and just talking to this student and knowing this student, we know that they're heavily centered on concepts of authority. So they like the idea of talking to academic staff. And if those academic staff are professors, then so much the better. They're not very happy with this concept of peer-centered learning, where they're learning from their peers. And that explains the difference in the network structure for that student. So, conclusions then. We think this visitors and residents model is really useful, and we think it helps us understand students' attitudes towards Google+. And we think it extends statistical evidence that we're able to extract from the network. And by looking at questionnaire responses, we see that residents actually say they find Google+ to be a more useful academic tool than visitors do. Now that's not to say, and Dave White would want me to say this, that's not to say that being a visitor is a bad academic strategy. A lot of highly successful students are very, very focused in terms of their activity. And so we're going back again now and rethinking where the academic benefits of these two behavior patterns lie, and what that tells us about using social tools with students. But we think our threefold framework of network, context and content is a very powerful approach to understanding how students interact with these tools. In this case it's Google+, but it could be other social tools as well. So I just want to finish off now with some acknowledgements. Fiona Wright has been a student who's worked with me for the last year and has done most of the analysis that I've shown you, deserves a lot of credit. Tony Hurst has helped us a lot with the network diagrams, and Dave White from Oxford for discussions about the visitors and residents model, and in helping to formulate our thoughts and our questionnaire and so on. Okay, so that's it. I hope that was useful. I have to say that's the first live presentation I've done using Hangout. It's been quite a weird experience because I haven't had any feedback from you at all, so I've no idea whether I've overrun in terms of time. I can see a couple of people smiling, a couple of people talking at the back. Absolutely brilliant. It's just like giving a lecture. Thanks. I hope that was useful, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And I don't know if you can hear me again, Alan. I've just unmuted the microphone.
Yep.
So let's take a couple of questions. If anybody would like to ask Alan a question, if you want to catch him on Google Plus, you can follow plus Alan Can, and you should be able to get through to him there. Any quick questions for Alan while we're here?
How did you get all these statistical data to make the models?
So the question was, how did you get the statistical data to make those models?
From Google Plus,
Yes.
or from FriendFeed. Okay, from Google Plus, we don't have the actual statistical test I showed you were from FriendFeed, and the FriendFeed reporting is easier than Google Plus because it reports all the separate categories. So it reports status updates, it reports likes, comments, and so on and so forth for each individual user. So we can get that very easily. It's much harder to extract that data from Google Plus because it's not really available via the API. So the statistics were the earlier stuff. The content analysis we've actually done manually. We've done by selecting students who were put in an interesting location on the visitor-resident mapping diagram, and we've just gone into Google Plus and extracted that manually because, again, doing it via the API is quite difficult.
Okay, that's great, thanks. And one more question? Oh, okay, so go on, one more question.
How do you turn a visitor into a resident?
How do you turn a visitor into a resident? There's a question.
Okay, so I'm in the. I don't know if Dave White could possibly be listening to this, and he might watch the recording if he's not listening live. So I have to be very, very careful. And I have to say that Dave would say that that's the wrong question. Dave would say the question is, should you turn a visitor into a resident? Because although from our questionnaire data, it's fairly clear-cut that visitors or residents are seemingly much more engaged academically, I think Dave's stance at the moment is that the visitor stance is actually much more efficient in using tools, and as an academic, you need to be like the males were on FriendFeed. You need to be quite sort of task-oriented and not just spend all day on Google Plus chatting away. So the question really is, should you turn a visitor into a resident?
That's smashing. Thanks very much for that. Could we have a round of applause for Alan? Thanks again, Alan, for this great experiment. Really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us. Bye-bye now.
Thank you all.